Recorded on site at the OCP Regional Summit in Lisbon, Portugal. On this episode of the Open Compute Project podcast, I sit down with Dean Nelson, founder of Infrastructure Masons and the CEO of Cato Digital. On this episode, Dean and I talk about why OCP and iMasons came together on the subject of sustainability, the recently released iMasons State of the Industry report, and why the work Dean is doing today may be the most important of his entire career. I hope you enjoy. We are here in beautiful Lisbon, Portugal at the 2024 OCP Regional Summit. And here with me, I have Dean Nelson. Welcome to the podcast, Dean.
Thanks, Rob. So this is my first time in Portugal, by the way. So I'm Dean Nelson. I'm the chairman and founder of Infrastructure Masons, and we're a professional association of about 6,000 people around the world, representing $200 billion of infrastructure projects in 130 countries, that type of thing. And I'm also the CEO of Cato Digital, which is a startup company going after low-cost, low-carbon compute, and it ties directly to OCP. And I do a lot of other industry work. So
fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me. Yeah, my first time in Portugal as well. And it's beautiful here.
Yeah, and the weather's great.
Like, we got very lucky this week with weather.
I was in London last week, and it was nice for a day, and then it became London.
Sounds like London.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we're here in Europe making investment with OCP, trying to understand this ecosystem more. We've been here for many years, but I mean, it's just growing a lot. It's a little bit different than the U.S. And I mean, what's your take on over the last 12 to 18 months? We've seen explosive growth due to things like AI. There's other things too as well. How's Europe different in your perspective?
I would say that if you look at the markets themselves, the largest market in the world is the U.S. It was the one that was more established when it came down to capacity and infrastructure and growth and just the concentration of hyperscale companies. And then you start to look at the expansion, their own equivalent, right? European-based global and national companies. But overall, I would say that the European element is going to grow as fast, if not faster, than it has in the last couple of years, because this demand that's come in, because you said it's AI and other things, but really AI is the trigger. It is the boost that we've all, I'd say, been waiting for probably 2 decades.
Yeah.
And I've kind of lived through seven, I guess, human impacting technological changes, if you think about that.
Okay.
Everything from, the personal computer, like way back in the day, to cell phones, to social media, to the World Wide Web, to just all of that. And now we're going into this, even the cloud aspects of this, everything going to cloud. And then now we're going into AI and just the engagement of that. And just so you get an idea, and this ties to Europe for a very specific reason. If you look at the adoption rate of new technology, for the majority of the world, the adoption rates have been slow and gotten faster and faster.
Sure.
Starting with electricity, it took 46 years.
Right.
For the general populace of the world to actually say that they're using electricity around the world. And then you start to look at the phone and then the internet, right? And personal computers and those things. And it just starts going like this when it comes down to the time it takes for the global adoption.
Yeah, it starts at like 40 years. And then what are we at now with like the most recent innovation? Like how?
Less than a year.
Less than a year for
where you've got global adoption, and that where there's a majority of the population is actually engaging with the technology, like social media, like the web, like cloud, like phones, those things. And this is where it's pretty incredible that first off, we've got this. Have you ever heard of the 1GE?
No.
So there's a guy named Shelley Palmer. He came up with this concept, and he said November 20th, 2022 was the beginning of the generative era. And the generative era is where you can no longer trust what you see, hear, or read, or hear, right? So it's anything that's there, right? It is. And he said, now fast forward, because that was the when ChatGPT came out of the labs and went into the mainstream. So think of January 2023.
Yep.
Kaboom. All of a sudden, we've got this application, ChatGPT, that went to 100 million users in 1 million users in 5 days, 100 million in a month or something, incredibly fast pace of adoption. And now, it's proliferated everywhere. But that's like one version
It's one application.
Yeah. Because you've got ChatGPT, AutoGPT, and hundreds of these things. And then that started to be woven into the very products and services that are being done by the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, like if you search Google right now, the top list, that's AI generated, right?
Right, because it's like a ChatGPT response to, oh, you asked a question. Well, I'm going to write you a little dissertation or a little summary of what that is.
Yeah.
It is happening every time, but you don't even know it. Right. And so then you look at even Microsoft Word and all of the Office 365 products. They've woven in ChatGPT into that.
Oh, yeah.
You look at Google.
See pop-ups all the time. Like, do you want to do this? Well, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yep. And even LinkedIn, when you put a post up, it says, would you like to rewrite this with AI?
Well, it'll digest it too. Is the recent addition I've seen is if you see a post you're not familiar with, it'll suggest prompts below it so you can learn more about the context of that post.
Yeah, it is. So this 1GE, basically now we're in 3GE because that was 2022 to 2023, right?
Okay.
And then, we're at 2022 to 20, and so we're in 2GE. So that, like, now think about 10GE. This is his whole thesis. That
we're on the first page of a very long book.
And we are scratching the surface when it comes down to how the adoption of these things and the integration of these things are going to influence our daily lives, everything.
But we saw yesterday, and that's probably where you're headed, is like, okay, now how does it impact infrastructure? Like yesterday, Meta saying they deployed last year 60,000 GPUs, and now it's
no, they went from 6,000 to 16,000 to 600,000. They had 100x growth in 2 years of GPUs. And that is indicative of the biggest buyers in the world. So you look at that 100x, and then they say, oh, we're going to go 10x again. But 10x of that is 6 million GPUs.
Yeah.
And I think that's low. So it again is woven into everything. Now, why this matters in Europe is I believe that Europe is actually leading the charge.
Interesting.
But it's leading it from regulation.
Oh, okay.
That has implications on everything that we're talking about here. So, how you go back and basically the AI aspects and then the efficiency of infrastructure and the workload and the useful work on that workload and the use of that power.
Yeah.
Why? We're running out of power everywhere, or we have. And we have all the ethical things and the risk elements of AI. Yet we have such a massive deployment and use of that actual technology.
And is that a challenge not only in scale, but of an industry that has historically, really the content is, for better or lack, has not really been regulated in that way? So this is somewhat new?
Yeah. I mean, the pace again of regulation that's coming in. And this is what I mean is Europe, whether it's what they're doing with data centers and the efficiency expectations of data centers, or what it means to regulations around just AI in general. How is it applied? What can it be used for? Those types of things.
Okay.
They've rapidly come up with kind of a playbook or at least a methodology, and they're starting to put that into law.
Right.
That's what I mean. So Europe is ahead. We will have to comply with things in Europe before we do in the US and APAC and everything else. So that's where I'd say that Europe, rightfully so, I think, which is great. The efficiency side, what they're doing with carbon and what they're doing with
they've been
data centers.
leading for a long time there.
Yeah, and now it's tangible because these global companies have to operate in certain areas, and in that, whether it's data sovereignty or the way that you engage within a country, there are big implications on that.
Yeah, I read a book years ago, and it was around hard truths, right? Mm-hmm. And so regulations are one of those hard lines, and it creates very clear boundaries that these companies are now going to have to they're going to have to meet the requirements. And they're different in every country in Europe. It's not like the US.
Yeah, but the EU has actually come together to say how they're going to do that, which is good. That but that's the point. Okay. Now, if you back up and say there's a Europe specific thing that's going to be driving specific decisions because of the nature of that regulation and the rules that they're putting in place. And Lauren Long said something yesterday. I forgot the exact quote, but regulation is the failure of something to control itself, something like that.
Okay.
I forgot. He had quoted it from somebody else, but it resonated with me because if we can go back and create the way that we are driving efficiency and sustainability and ethics and all those ourselves, we are the most informed to do that. We don't want someone else to go back and try and learn our space and do those things and enforce those. Sure. That they may be not informed enough that we may have the wrong result. So regardless, this needs to be with the EU and everything else, how we partner up. And I'm talking about OCP and, iMasons, as well as the other data center coalitions and those things. We need to work together on that regulation to educate because, like you said, regulation is inevitable. It's going to be coming.
Right.
It just comes down to what's forcing it to happen.
And then who's writing it. right? Is it an outside industry that there's no familiarity with ours? And, we'll regulate it just like we've regulated this other industry.
Yeah,
that could have very negative impacts.
And I think that groups like Open Compute and iMasons have a good opportunity to be a voice into those things to help influence, because we represent the people that do this. They own the portfolios, they build the products, they provide the services, so they understand, what's happening. And so I think if we can figure out ways in which we can engage with those regulators, right, local civic leaders and that type of thing, we're going to be much more effective. We have to.
Well, we've already started out, and I'll jump ahead, is with the iMasons and OCP Strategic Alliance that we just announced at this global summit yesterday.
Yay.
And release. Yes, very excited. This has been a work in progress for a long time.
Yeah.
But really, I think it came from both of our communities. We had so many members that were dual residents of iMasons and OCP that were saying, we're doing this over here and we're also doing this over here. You guys should really work together.
We shouldn't duplicate efforts. Yeah. And let's jump there, because I think it's the complementary nature of it. I love it that if you look at Infrastructure Masons is a professional association of people that build digital infrastructure.
Yeah, right. So we're talking to mainly, I'm hoping this will go out everywhere, but OCP is probably going to be our primary audience. And so, give us a little background to those who are OCP who are not familiar with iMasons.
Yeah. A
little bit about iMasons, and then the iMasons Climate Accord that came out of that group.
Yeah. So iMasons, again, is a professional association, and we basically unite the builders of the digital age on 4 strategic initiatives: education, inclusion, sustainability, and innovation.
Okay.
And those are the pillars in which we've built this organization over the last 8 years. And the people around the world that are in this, they leave their companies at the door.
Okay.
We're a professional association of 501c6 in the U.S., which means that we represent the people in the industry. So you don't lose status or your position if you change companies.
Okay.
It's about you.
Okay.
Right. And so that's a really, really core tenet to what we do. But one of the biggest initiatives we went after was the iMasons Climate Accord. So when we formed iMasons, it was to get the insights from people that actually make the decisions, whether it's product or portfolios or buying, et cetera, on these things. And then how can we go accelerate success in those 4 areas? Right? Getting more people in from an education standpoint, diversifying the actual talent pool so they don't all look like me, Caucasian males over 50, right? How do we really tap into all the different pools through the inclusion side? And then the other is around sustainability. How do we build digital infrastructure the right way?
Yep.
And then innovation is, how do we apply that across everything to make sure we can compound the impact? What innovations need to be in each area?
So it sounds like it was a maturing of the industry in multiple areas instead of just one driver, right?
Yeah. And I think we had a gap in the industry. Like, there's a whole bunch of very, effective organizations around the world that we've all been part of. And so, but we thought, how do we go back and keep continuity for people? Because that was one of the challenges in a lot of groups, is you change jobs and all of a sudden you don't have that job or that thing in that organization.
Right, a standards organization or something your company's part of.
Right.
This is different.
Yeah. So that was an important thing. And that continuity allowed people to continue to participate. And as their roles changed or whatever, they could still be digging in and diving and adding value because of their experience and expertise. And so that was great. Now, what we went forward with is, in the Climate Accord, the industry wasn't moving fast enough on decarbonization.
Okay.
And, we're looking at just sustainability in general. So we pulled together our advisory council, one member from each company. And this included AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, just a bunch of people that represent that are individuals at those companies. And we came together and said, how could we find one thing that we could do together as an industry,
right,
to battle climate change? And so that was held at Christian Belotti's house. We called it Shea Belotti. We pulled them in. This is right after kind of the COVID things were lifting and things.
Yeah.
And it was great. We spent six plus hours in his house and just hammered through a bunch. And then we had these breakouts in all of his different rooms, came together and each presented. And then from there, the Climate Accord was born. And really what that worked out to be was decarbonization of digital infrastructure is alignment across every one of those people in the room and all the different companies. We're all going after decarbonization. There's more to all this.
Sure.
But in the end, can we go back and figure out a way that we can really accelerate?
This is a common thread that ties us all together.
Right. And so that decarbonization, we figured out a methodology, and that was simply categorizing it to say, we're going to decarbonize materials, the concrete, steel, copper, et cetera, that builds buildings,
Right.
equipment, the IT kit, to the network, to the actual mechanical, electrical kit that goes inside of a building, and the power. That allows us to be able to do embodied carbon, actual energy itself for consumption to do work,
Right.
operational carbon, all of it. But those categories simplified everything. Decarbonized digital infrastructure across materials, equipment, and power.
Fascinating.
So that's where I think a lot of the joint work, because OCP is expertise in all the stuff going in the building,
Right.
but also expertise, of course, how data centers are designed and the mechanical, electrical components, because every these things is starting to weave together. If you look at what's on the floor today, we have mechanical systems, liquid cooling on almost every one of those deployments out there. Big deployments because of density. It's just getting denser and denser and closer.
Yeah, definitely. We've coupled these things. And in parallel, and I think this sets up the alliance, is that at about the 2019 same period, is OCP has always had sustainability, and I would say it's almost an unofficial tenet. Like, I think most people, there's a lot of naturals that kind of happen because vanity-free server design, things like that. So we don't have plastic. We don't even have sliding rails. I mean, everything's pretty much toolless. So just the nature of what we do is decarbonizing because it's dematerializing.
Simplifying. Which gets to the result of less carbon, less stuff. Or less stuff, less carbon.
But we hadn't formalized it. So then in 2021, OCP created sustainability as a top-level project, one of our 12 projects. So now we have similar structure as we do with server, with networking, all those things. And at the same time, as we made sustainability as an official fifth tenet for all the contributions that come through OCP. So now we have a structure that you had already had in your organization, and now they're starting to align. And now it's really more the same people.
Yeah.
Because they're maybe even their role within their companies is sustainability. And we even have other examples like Alex Rakow, who's our dual hat wearing iMasons OCP member, who's a leader in both organizations. And there's more examples of that. So that kind of pulls us together to the alliance on ICA, really our focus on ICA, but iMasons OCP's alliance.
Yep. And I think we all have the same objective. How do we decarbonize digital infrastructure?
Absolutely.
And then we each have influence and expertise in different categories that are completely complementary. So we lack a lot of the network and hardware components within iMasons. And so this is a natural fit to say, okay, we're going to take an organization that really has united a bunch of the people, biggest players in the world, providers, all that, to truly go after optimized, vanity-free, standard, open designs.
Yeah.
Billions and billions. I thought, was it $34 billion worth of influence?
Yeah.
On because of OCP.
Yeah, this year. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So which is exactly what we're looking for. You've got in iMasons a bunch of the buyers and the portfolio owners and builders, and then you've got OCP, which is the product and the other things, but also it is those people in here as well.
Well, that's true. And I guess I maybe overgeneralize is we have people, and we do have some of these people with these dual hats and dual roles.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a Venn diagram, right? As you described, really the owner operator facility side being a big portion of your membership and interest. And then from the OCP side, we kind of grew from the server out.
Yeah.
Right. And you're kind of from out in. And so we've kind of pulled these two ends of our entire spectrum together.
And that's why we're so excited about it, because it is 100% complementary. We all have the same visions when it comes down to we need to build sustainable digital infrastructure. And that's all elements. And by the way, we define digital infrastructure is a combination of data centers that provide services to people and machines.
Okay.
So inside of those data centers are all the equipment that actually enables those services to be done for people and machines.
Sure.
Because we got machines talking to machines, people to machines, machines to people. Like the point is, it's a digital service. And that engine behind it to deliver those services, that's digital infrastructure.
Right.
That's all of us. So the climate accord, I think what's important in this tie is that now that we've united 266 companies, okay, here's what's a little different. iMasons is a professional association of people.
Right.
Then we created a program under the iMasons umbrella called the Climate Accord, and that represents the companies. So we created a separate governing body. The governing body has the voting authority, budget authority to drive what needs to be done.
Yep.
And so that the Climate Accord now is made up of AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Schneider Electric, Digital Realty, and then I sit on the governing body representing iMasons. So we have that group of people that are driving the strategy to take what we did at Shablati and translate it into this.
Right.
And so now we have 266 companies that have signed up for the Climate Accord, all focused on decarbonization, digital infrastructure, but they represent $6 trillion of market cap.
Wow.
$6 trillion of combined market cap.
That's significant.
That is amazing buying power. And so same thing with OCP. This is influencing buying decisions. I want to standardize.
That's how it happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's where the impact happens.
It's you leave with your wallet, things change.
Right.
So now what we're doing, and we might as well just go right into this part. I'm super excited about it because it takes what we're doing a deeper step further, right? We use your expertise on standardization and really bringing the designers and the product companies and the consumers together into how do we institutionalize or actually operationalize the measurement of carbon.
Right.
Because if we're trying to decarbonize, what's our baseline? Where do we start? How do we handle all that?
Right.
So this is the taxonomy of being able to say from birth to use to death, that LCA, that lifetime carbon assessment of all these things that produces an EPD,
right?
That environmental product disclosure, which actually is the embodiment of a carbon label. And that carbon label is what we came out of Shablati. If we had a carbon label, everything behind it, we can get the data we need. We can now start making buying decisions based on carbon performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Very.
So, yep. So that's where you guys had a work group coming together on carbon accounting.
Yep.
Yeah, and they great. Let's just join forces because now we can accelerate everything. Because we're going to do this on buildings. This is the concrete steel. There's got to be a carbon label for the building.
Right.
Right. And then the product goes into it for the duration of that product. You need to know what that is. And then the power.
For a lot of us, I think on the OCP side is we've done so much product solutions, right? And individual scopes of this, we're going to make this piece open, we're going to make this piece open. But really, I think this partnership is more of this like bringing the stack together and pulling all the pieces, because it's not just the server or the memory or whatever, but it's the concrete that houses the building that's going to house all this equipment and bringing those pieces together. So we were doing this carbon accounting, trying to understand what our carbon is, but really, and we have the framework in order to do these, because we do it with specifications. We do it in a lot of other areas. It's not just in carbon, obviously, but that Shablati workshop you had, that very intense workshop, really drew a roadmap and a picture of what it could be in the future. The idea of a label similar to a nutrition label, the idea of having these targets is now we've kind of pulled vision and participation together that you had on your side and our framework on the OCP side, and let's get together and put these things together. And they're incredibly complementary. Yeah.
And again, you guys have a lot of expertise and oomph when it comes down to standardization and how to specify and really make this manifest into this is how we're actually doing it, because that product from that company who's an OCP member will have a carbon label. That carbon label in various forms will now allow us to have access to that EPD information, which is done by an LCA. Like, perfect. So everything out of Shablati, I remember Christian saying, like that light bulb moment where he goes, wait a second. If I have a carbon label on something, that means I don't care how accurate the data is behind it. The fact that I have a label will drive the fidelity of that information over time. Why? Because I have a standard mechanism to go back and say, let me see your carbon footprint. Let me see your methodology. Let me see what your results are. Let me test that. Let me validate that. Just like PUE and everything else, you got more scrutiny on it. It got better.
Yeah. Yeah. It didn't start perfect. I think, and the other person who's really said a lot and who was involved in those early days was Phil Lawson-Shanks.
Yes.
And the thing that he said to me that was most, as we started on this journey, and we started before our announcement, a long time ago, was you have to start.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of reasons why it's not this or not that. You have to start. And I've been repeating that chant because it's going to be a journey before we're at a comparable label that is 100% accurate, or maybe never 100% accurate, but accurate enough to lead with your wallet and make decisions. But we have to start with things like disclosure. And I know our teams are working together. Miranda Gardner, who is the executive director of the ICA, is helping and is part of the leadership that is working specifically on carbon disclosure. How do we get the data? We have to start because we can have the label as a vision and I believe we'll get there in whatever form factor that takes. It's up for our communities and our members to decide exactly what that looks like. But the disclosure, it's an amazing process to watch these experts get in a room together and really, really hash it out and have, very good dialogue and disagreement that gets us to a better result. It's been amazing though.
I think what's also important is we have not defined useful work. I think what we've basically said is we're building digital infrastructure, just like you plug in the wall.
Right.
Is it efficient or not? Is it sustainable or not? The power comes from a source, and how it's done is up to the industry to deliver to be the most sustainable, most cost-effective thing.
Sure.
I don't judge what's on the other side when it comes down to, well, I plug that in to play a game, to whatever else.
Right.
The point is that electricity for the wall is an important thing. Digital infrastructure is providing that for everything.
Sure.
And so what I think is critical is we're able to go back and look at how much capacity is deployed globally. Can we have a mechanism that allows us to be able to now see the sustainability elements of this deployed capacity, the operations of that capacity, and we can keep driving more efficiency, both ecologically, economically, and for those deployments.
Well, we can't ask the users of technology to evaluate, or it's impossible for them if we don't know, we're not doing it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're getting at is
get your own backyard cleaned up first.
Right, a little bit, software guys call it, dog fooding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Eat your own dog food. So I think we need to do that. What's the other saying? I don't know if it was
drink your own champagne.
Drink your own champagne. Okay, that's better. I like that. That's
it tastes better than dog food.
Much tastier. Yes.
Eat your own caviar.
is that consumer experiences become business to business expectations. And we have this interest of sustainability and consumers leading with their wallet and how do they do it?
Yeah.
And in our IT ecosystem, in our data center, digital infrastructure, we haven't had the tools to make those good decisions. And I think that's where we're at with this.
Yeah, I think also the most complex thing to do is simplify something. And,
sure.
I love what OCP has done because it's a toolless Lego building block. I can put compute, storage, network, other things. It's easy to just assemble what we need to do. It's standardized and it's scalable.
Well, you're leveraging that yourself a bit, right?
Yeah.
With Cato?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I work at a company called Cato Digital, and we basically take Second Life equipment and we deploy it into data centers using stranded capacity
Second Life.
Clean energy.
Previously used OCP hardware.
Yep. So you take the First Life is at hyperscalers and they use it for a certain amount of years. We take that, refresh it, and now roll it right back out and provide a bare metal platform. So we were a bare metal cloud for, indirect platforms, direct retail, and enterprises to consume, but we're at half the price, but we're also at no carbon. And this is why the carbon accounting is very interesting for me, not just from what we're doing with the industry, but just what I'm trying to do in my day job.
Right.
On top of it, because, I'm a very purpose-driven guy. And I spent 30 years of my career on the buying side at Sun Microsystems, eBay, PayPal, Uber, that type of thing. We built global hyperscale infrastructure all over the place.
Sure.
So when
this is not your first rodeo.
Right. But when I came to this side, I'm like, okay, we've done all this really cool stuff. What can I do? Like in my day job, how do I go back and live and embody what we're talking about here for the climate accord, for, the iMasons values and those things? And I honestly think this could be the biggest thing I've ever done in my career. I've driven $10 billion worth of infrastructure projects across 4 continents. So what?
Interesting.
Great. It's happened. How sustainable was it? I know it helped change lives and do things from eBay and PayPal and Uber and those things.
Sure.
But in the end of it, am I helping or hurting? So I look at that going, okay, we did a lot of really good things. But we're about to triple our industry. Triple the industry. And just to get it clear, there are 7 million data centers. These are 2021 numbers. 7 million data center locations around the world. These are things with a unique street address from a street corner.
7 million?
7 million. And this is always a contested number. But the reason for that is a lot of people are looking at these, they narrowed in on the definition of a data center.
Okay.
And that's just a campus with data center buildings in it, whether it's a hyperscaler, enterprise, or colo, right? But the thing is, there's a lot more infrastructure than that.
Sure.
So when you take the reports that are done by the U.S. and others, you broaden it. This is why we define digital infrastructure as a combination of data centers providing services to people and machines. The electronic services to people and machines. So that's everything from a hyperscaler, but it's also the ones that are doing the orchestration and automation for lighting systems. It's digital infrastructure for a machine, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
To Bitcoin. Whether you like it or not, it is consuming a lot of energy and it's providing a service, a digital service that people are consuming. So that's why we wanted to have a holistic picture of what is digital infrastructure. So the way I see it is whenever it leaves the device, everything in between as it traverses is digital infrastructure. So when it hits that tower goes to fiber, that fiber goes to a repeater, that repeater goes back to a data center in some place and into a server and is stored and processed. That's digital infrastructure.
Sounds like a fair assessment.
Yeah.
So we're going to triple that.
Yes. So just to get an idea, 7 million data center locations.
Okay.
It's 2021, 105 gigawatts of built capacity across 3 categories. Okay. 594 terawatt hours of consumption. That represents 2.4% of the global energy draw.
Yep.
2021.
Yep.
Now, you just look at that one. We haven't even talked about what happened with cloud, the pandemic, the other stuff, that the acceleration of these numbers, right?
A lot has changed since 2021.
A little bit. And then you add AI on top of it because cloud was already going at a massive clip. It didn't change. In other words, the numbers are that there's only 20% of companies that have fully migrated into cloud. There's still 80%.
Wow, I didn't realize it was so low.
And I know it sounds very low, but if you look at it, so many companies still have a mixture of their own platforms, their own things. They're in colos. They've migrated out of their server rooms into that.
Because I guess they have a portion of their portfolio that's not in cloud. So
right,
okay.
And if you look at it, cloud is supposed to kill the colo, but it ballooned colo. Why? Because cloud couldn't build everything themselves. They needed partners, and
especially now. Look at the landscape right now. Colo's on fire. Look at the lease rates. I mean, look at Northern Virginia is out of capacity.
It is 0. Yeah. And it's the biggest data center portfolio in the world. But you tie that all together, that if we look at this 105 gigawatts and we're going to triple, there are hundreds of gigawatts that are going to be built. Now, the reason this is important, and I'll tie this back to Cato in a minute, is that 105 gigawatts, because of the demand, remember that pace of adoption?
Yeah.
That translated, and Mark Ganzi from Digital Bridge made a quote, right? His prediction was that we're going to have 38 gigawatts of new capacity from AI alone. Okay, that was a year plus ago. Okay? Right as everything was turning up. 38 gigawatts just for AI. I think we've already had that absorption.
Well, yeah,
right?
Especially if you have Meta saying we're going to 100x our capacity and then 10x that. It has to.
And then you just look at the leasing. People are buying dirt. Do you have power? Yes, we have access to power. Great, we'll take it all.
Right.
And gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts. So it's funny, in our iMasons sessions with the advisory council, we're having these discussions around clean energy zones, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they're saying, oh, well, we could do this, this much and this gigawatt here. And they're like, yeah, we want all the gigawatts for ourselves. Okay, that means you're going to do 10 gigawatts. You have 10 hyperscalers together. Like, these numbers are just getting massive, and they're not an exaggeration.
It feels like that. Even 12 months ago, as me being on the facility side, the equipment side previously, is like I have people calling me going,
yeah,
I'm seeing RFQs for quantities that can't possibly be real.
Mm-hmm.
They're real.
Yep. And if you just look at a few of the indicators that you talked about, the lease rates, right?
Yeah.
Occupancy, there's less than 6% available capacity in the U.S. and less than 3% in the major markets like Silicon Valley and in Ashburn, those things. And Ashburn actually goes down to 0 depending on where it is.
Yeah.
So you look at just that. Then you look at the buy rates. NVIDIA, 12-month lead time, 52 weeks.
Yep.
And all capacity that's being built is already allocated. To whom? The biggest players in the world.
Sure.
But everybody else needs this too. So those 2 indicators, it's filled up. There's more demand.
Right.
It's not stopping. And I get a lot of people that debate with me saying, yeah, but this is a wave. Remember the .com or the .bomb, remember cloud and all, like everything is going to be this little dump back. It's not a bubble. And just my perspective, 35 years now, I've watched these things where, the irrational exuberance and things that are happening. And I remember right up to the .com, wow, all these companies. But then you realize there really were no business plans behind those. It imploded because they had exorbitant valuations and it just wasn't real.
Well, and they put, I think one of the funny examples is like, they were trying to sell back to dog food. I don't know why that's the theme.
Pets.com.
Right.
No, yeah.
But dog food over the internet. But you didn't have the infrastructure to support that shipping before Amazon came along.
Right.
So yeah, like you had an idea and you had it on the internet, but you couldn't really operationalize a lot of it, or not successfully.
Yeah, and if you look at the difference between today, there's a lot of companies and a lot of buying and a lot of money going into the space.
Oh, sure.
And there will be a reckoning, no matter what. There's going to be a consolidation, but there's not going to be a crash from my perspective. And the reason for that is the actual adoption rates, because now we have tangible, applicable things for people to consume. Yep. Where we didn't have the infrastructure or that was just overblown in the .com era. This is woven into the very fabric of Office 365,
right?
Of Google search, customers, of Meta's platform. Like, it's just in, and at a rapid pace. So that means that this expansion is going to continue. So if you take Mark Anzi's numbers of 38 gigawatts, okay, that translates to a huge amount of buildings, hardware, and power. And you look at the constraints in all these different markets. It's not that the utilities can't generate power. It's that the utilities can't get the power to where it needs to be.
Right.
And that's one of the key things that we've seen in the report we just announced, is that we need to consider for these large data centers to move the data center to the power, not the power to the data center.
You're setting this up to talk about, what did you do in your career and how important it was, and now you have an opportunity to maybe affect the next 2/3 of this growth in a different way. So I want to talk about Cato a little bit, but then you just kind of clued us into, there's a very impressive industry report that iMasons just put out. So let's talk about Cato and the shift and the difference between what you did in your career and what Cato does now in the face of all of these challenges, because capacity is an issue. The hyperscalers are taking everything they can get, but there's a lot of other people out there. There's open models available, so it won't just be reserved for the few. There's definitely customers out there, people who want to run different applications. They don't want it in the cloud for whatever reason. So talk a little about Cato, and then what you learned and what you've seen over your career. We kind of get a state of the union here on the rest of the industry that anybody can see and make their own decisions, right? So first on Cato, and then we'll get into the report.
Yeah, we'll do the patterns and how this all overlaps, because they do all tie together, ironically. So Cato, again, the reason I was giving you those numbers, if you look at that expansion, like what Mark Anzi was talking about, right now, of the 105 gigawatts capacity, there's at least 37 gigawatts never used.
Right.
38, 37? What are we doing? And
I guess it's only getting worse, right? We had a presentation earlier at our keynote session talking about stranded capacity.
Yep, and Hassan was basically what he's done, I think, at Cadence now. He was with Future Facilities before. I believe that they acquired Future Facilities. He's been beating this drum for 2 decades because he saw it directly. Right. He did his, not the BIM model, digital twin. So he basically went back and now tied all the pieces together.
Right.
Oh, I can see the inefficiencies. And so what we've been basically sharing is, if you go to any data center and you look at the capacity that is contracted, then you look at the capacity that's consumed, it is much lower. And at Uber, the best we ever got, we did 10 megawatt availability zones. The best we ever got was 6 megawatts consumption. 40% of the contract capacity we had, we never used.
Wow.
Now, add that up across all the different companies. That's like Uber. Now, there are others that, like Meta and AWS, et cetera, that are hitting 80+%. There's still 10 to 20% in the best in the world. But then you look at the rest of the world and it's 60, 50, 40, 30. Just ask any colo provider on what they actually have as far as utilization.
Well, and historically it was build another data center. We'll go get more power. But now things have changed.
And this is where we're taking advantage of a problem and turning it into an opportunity from a Cato standpoint. So first is, because consider that 37 gigawatts. That means that in every data center in the world, there's available capacity that no one could get access to. So what we did at Cato is we had written a package called M9, and this was a software package that virtualized power. It allows us to get access to stranded capacity because we create different SLAs for usage of it, just like virtualization, compute, storage, and network. We flipped and decided to use that ourselves. Okay. So we now here's the strategy itself. We're taking the waste stream of retired equipment, OCP equipment, that's coming out of hyperscalers, turning it into a supply chain. We refresh the equipment. We package that back up based on the OCP, maximize standard, maximize density in a rack, and we roll it into data centers. And when we roll it in that data center, we get access to the stranded power, which means I just deployed an Ashburn. I got power. I got capacity.
No one can deploy an Ashburn right now.
Right. And why is that? Because the data center providers' hands are tied, because I have a 5.9 contract with all these people and 100% of my capacity is allocated, not consumed, but allocated at a 5.9 SLA. So we come in and say, well, we'll be a 2.5/9 SLA. and we'll enforce it on ourselves.
We'll take the gap. We'll take the arbitrage.
Yeah. And by the way, if there's any kind of contention, we'll shut ourselves down.
So
Why is that?
You're not jeopardizing the main.
Yep.
main
So they
customer.
keep their core that way. And then we basically utilize all that stranded power. So think about the climate accord again.
Okay.
If I can take a waste stream and now say embodied carbon was paid for by the previous owner, I now have given it a second life. The embodied carbon in this is 0. Everything else is a very, very low carbon footprint, operationally, transportation, et cetera.
And if you put it in the context of the avoided carbon from what was going to have to be a new server in place, you're way ahead of the game here.
And then you think of that curve, how much stuff. So our goal is to put 1 million servers, second life servers in 1,000 data centers in 100 countries.
Wow.
Now, why is that? Because I know there's 1 million servers. There's at least 43 million being retired by 2025. 43 million, right?
That will go typically to a waste stream.
And that waste stream, now they're very responsible. You think about Iron Mountain and Sims and Tests and all the other, right? Illumint and those ITAD vendors do a great job because they've figured out how to take these things, extract the parts that can be reused, but they're parts, they harvest those. And then they take the rest of that and they put it into recycling.
Right.
But the challenge is that it's like getting a BMW 3 Series driven in, and then you say, that's no longer value. Take out the engine and the seats and then crush the rest. Right. Now you recycled it, but you took a perfectly good car and didn't use it as a car.
Right.
So we're taking this perfectly good rack with this perfectly good servers because they're still rented in cloud today, those instance types, those chipsets today.
Yeah, they're current.
Yeah. So we take that and we now pull it out and use the entire thing. So that means that 100% of that rack, we are repurposing.
Fantastic.
We've refreshed and repurposed. So waste stream to a supply chain allows optimal price, right, and performance to align to customers' expectation. Then you take a waste stream when it comes down to stranded power, and we take advantage of that. So that 37 gigawatts in all these data centers, guess what? 1,000 locations? Easy.
Wow.
Because they all have stranded power.
They all have it.
So we land in there, but that's just the point is we're now flipping this around to become a consumer of our product inside of that data center and de-risking for the data center because they're limited in what they can do contractually.
Sure.
So now we can go back and add into that. And then you go to locations that have clean energy. So suddenly we have 3 big buckets in Cato that could be carbon-free compute. So if I did that for 1 million servers across 1,000 data centers in 100 countries, that's why I believe it can be the biggest impact of my career. We've contributed to a second life, like entire strategy that enables this capacity for the world to consume that will avoid the need to build more for that 1 million servers.
Wow.
And by the way, the next wave of those retired servers is the next one. This is a circular, it is the whole embodiment of what you should be doing for circular economy.
Yeah, well, and they're scaling too, right? So if you have their projections on how much they're scaling, there's more compute available.
Yeah, so we must do this in the end of it because there's just, I'm really happy we recycle 98% of the stuff that's in there.
Sure.
But we're missing a huge opportunity here and that's what we're going after.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've learned most is, my background isn't core in sustainability, but what I've learned so much from both of our sustainability groups is, things like, recycling is the last ditch effort, really.
Right.
There's a lot to do before we get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So that's the Cato element and how it ties together. Again, my purpose in this is that I've had 35 years of this wonderful career that I've had so many opportunities given to me. And now I want to make sure that what I'm doing in this round has the biggest impact. Yeah. So that, and because both, by the way, it's economic and ecology because we're offering hardware or bare metal at half the price of cloud. And no carbon.
Half is incredible.
That's where we start.
Yeah.
It gets even better. And what's cool is now we're rolling out GPUs. And I want to tie this back to the next thing that also goes to this report. There's a classification, that big wave of demand that's coming. Everyone's kind of got their feeling that, oh my God, I have to redesign every data center to do this because of my, super pods with 1,024 GPUs that have to use InfiniBand, right? With low latency, high bandwidth.
Starkly different.
Yeah. But that's for training.
Right.
And if you look at training itself, it needs to be close. It's dense. It's going to be huge utilizations. It's great. But it's for 20% of the workload.
Yeah. And what the other side is?
Inference.
Right.
And what is awesome about this, I remember Edge a decade ago, and everyone's like, what's the killer app? What's the thing that's going to do it? And we all had these ideas of gaming and,
streaming,
immersion experiences and all that. They never materialized into somebody say, I have to have something close to a user.
Right.
Inference needs low latency. Why? Because I'm now doing some type of interaction with a GPT something, whether it's ChatGPT or image generation, right, or immersive experience because of my AI-enabled system.
Right.
You do things on here, but you still need stuff close to get it done. That inference is going to make millions of data centers more.
Yeah, but smaller, closer to the user.
And here's the beauty of it. The latest and greatest GPUs with the highest density, highest power consumption needs to be in core data centers because they're going to do training. The second and third generation of them, like for example, H100s is what's out. The next HB200s, the BD2, whatever, right?
Blackwell chip, new Blackwell chip, things like that. That's going to be...
Those are all coming, and guess what? They're going to replace the H100s. But what replaced the H100s? A100s.
Right.
What replaced the A100s? V100s.
Right.
We're deploying V100s in 16 and 32 gigabyte versions in 8-way and 16-way configs, servers.
Yeah.
And that is doing inference. It's doing image generation.
I think most people have a false impression that all AI activity, workload has to happen on the latest and greatest chips, and that's how it has to happen. But I mean, people are running certain small models on their laptops.
Yeah.
Today.
Yep. And what does that require? It can be on the CPU, but it'll also be the GPU enabled thing on your laptop. But it just comes down to, I have a model of a certain size that has a fit in GPU memory to be able to do the training and also inference. But the training part, this is why 16 and 32 gig. And if you know the hottest aftermarket GPU right now is a 4090. Why is that? Because it's a single system with 24 gig. 24 gig fits the majority of models out there that have been trained.
Interesting.
You take that model and then you do a small model that for your own like classification using that big model.
Yeah.
And then you do inference against those things. So you're using multiple GPUs, but the GPUs are independent. I'm running 16 simultaneous ChatGPT sessions on that GPU.
Wow.
Low latency to somebody. But the point is that we take this workload that's core, that's 20% of the demand. It needs to be the fastest and greatest, basically supercomputers out there.
Sure.
And the biggest players in the world are all fighting on large language models and who's going to win.
Right.
Many of them. But in the end of it is everybody's going after that. But this 80% is inference.
Yeah, that's user side, user driven.
Yep. And the pattern again in this is that you look at cloud, everybody had a rational, I need the latest and greatest instance on AWS and those things.
Sure.
And what they did was they had a budget put to them and they figured out a way to optimize to say, well, okay, 20% of this workload needs the latest stuff and the rest of it I can use older instances. It's the same pattern. Now we're just saying inference right down here will be 80% of that workload. That's my prediction, which means massive expansion in metros and rural areas that also have tons of machines like agriculture and others that are constantly doing things with inference between machines to machines.
And it sounds like that's the perfect application for second life hardware.
Right. And honestly, I think that this is what I love because we're also an alliance partner with Cato's a partner on the startup side with OCP.
Yep.
Because now we have the way to go take this second life and truly show how OCP has an even broader impact.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that ties directly back to the carbon accounting work that we're doing, right? To the labels themselves, because I need to be able to have defensible information to give back to companies that are using our services. Say, here's what you avoided, and they put them in their actual, carbon disclosure.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is all these pieces coming to align. And I think the other thing that's really interesting about Cato joining the OCP startup is that, especially in Europe, we have such a big enterprise community compared to the US, where mostly it's major players, right? And significant hyperscale influence. We're looking at our data and we're seeing, the enterprise is so strong in Europe. So, I mean, I think it's a really great tie-up. But it also sounds like a lot of things have changed in the market recently. I mean, we've seen it in headlines things, but iMasons has gone a step further and released a report.
Yeah. So now tie all this together.
Yeah.
I've got my experience and what's happening here, but then take all of the peers in the industry. What are they facing? What are the trends? What are the patterns that have come back? And so the last year, we basically gathered that information from people all over the world, right? In the different sessions. And we were saying, what are your top 10? What are the things that you're challenged with? And so we took all that information, anonymized it from everything from one-on-one conversations I had with hyperscalers and big players to, group meetings, to advisory council sessions, to workshops, to local community member workshops. We took all that information and now came up with this report. And this report came out last week.
Yep.
And you should take a look on LinkedIn. We've got there's a streaming of the report itself. I did an introduction summarizing it.
Yeah, you recorded it and then you've reshared it. So somebody can go back and look at the recording.
Yep.
Right. And then they go to the iMasons website to get a copy of it.
Yep, and there's you should be able to download a copy of the report right from there. Just it's I think on the front page or under resources. But this report itself, what's important about it is that it is the pulse of what's going on, and the punchline for all of this. There are 4 primary things that the basically leaders around the world are facing.
Okay,
power, right? Obvious. We don't have access to power, and the growth is going to continue. Second is people. There's a 300,000 person shortfall by 2025. 300,000 jobs, right? That we can't fill. Then you've got perception.
Sure.
We have all of this pushback on data centers, not in my backyard. Those things, take the biggest ones in the world, whether it's Ireland and Dublin to Northern Virginia, to Silicon Valley, to Phoenix, to others. They're all starting to say, wait a minute, what are these big concrete buildings and things?
Right.
So perception is a big one, but it's not for us to go educate people, by the way. This is for us to make sure that we can be a good neighbor as digital infrastructure.
Yep.
We're going to go in. We have a whole bunch of focus in on economics. We're going to add to the infrastructure that's there. We're going to help lower taxes. We're going to,
Sure.
those things. But in the end of it, there's an ecology standpoint to that too. What are we doing for the local ecosystem? And then there's a social aspect. What does it mean for the people that live there?
Right.
We have to listen as much as we talk when it comes down to how we go into these communities, because for us in perception, it is the balance of those 3. If I can go in and say I've got economic incentives and ecological balance, this is soil, water, air, et cetera, within that area. And then the social ones when it comes to jobs and equality and all the pieces that local community cares about. If you can achieve balance in those 3, you'll be pleased in my backyard.
Interesting, because I think over the years I've seen somebody championing one of those.
Right.
But then the other legs of the stool seem to fall off sometimes.
Yep.
And it sounds like your report has shown that all 3 matter.
Yep. And then if you look at it, if those 3 things come together, because perception is around all of this. For us, a big challenge is power. Then we got people we can't get in because people don't know about us. We don't have the right, mixture of people coming in and education programs and things. Perception about who we are as an industry. And the last one was planet. Now, planet last year was number 1.
Yeah.
This year, it was lower. Not because people didn't care, because there's so much going on. It's important, but it's just not top of mind. Right. So what we did is we said, we all agree, this needs to elevate. We made it in the top list. And the reason was what I started with. If we're about to triple infrastructure, that means we're going to build 3 times more buildings.
Yep.
We're going to build 3 times more hardware. Right. And we're going to have 3 times more power consumption. That is a lot of embodied carbon. You take everything we've done, that pales in comparison. If we do not go back and apply decarbonization efforts to these things now,
right,
we're basically perpetuating the same problem times 3.
Do you think it's because people haven't taken a longer view? Is that the issue? Like, so much has changed. It's moving so fast. I have to move now.
It's by not by choice, but I think what's happening is the pattern we're seeing is a growth at all costs. Yeah. And what is losing out to that growth? In other words, I have to get power. They compromise on certain things.
Sure.
Now, again, I don't want to go back and say that these big players are not doing the right thing. They are literally leading. The biggest clean energy buyers in the world are the hyperscalers. They've done 54 gigawatts of capacity, right? Contracts of renewable energy itself. So they're doing these huge efforts. But when it comes down to the entire supply chain, one of the things that we that came out of here as a potential solution for all of this is a thing called a clean energy zone. Okay?
Interesting.
And this is the concept of moving the data center to the power versus the power to the data center, because we've grown organically in all these different places. We went into an area, we redeveloped, we did things, we're trying to fit in data centers, buildings, electrical distribution, all that, right? Transmission lines, and it's an organic growth. So it's not a master plan type thing.
No.
So a clean energy zone is a master planned town or city size development concentrated around clean energy sources serving multiple industries, including multi-tenant data centers.
Interesting.
So take that definition, and if you look at it going, well, that could be 100 megawatts in an area like Africa, okay, in certain parts of Africa that don't have infrastructure,
Right.
to a 10 gigawatt campus I mentioned before. Because if you start to concentrate digital infrastructure in those places, well, then you could have battery manufacturing, auto, all the other large power consumption industries. Because by the way, we're competing with them. They're competing with us.
Oh, yeah.
Access to that power. So if we're tripling our infrastructure and we're 2.4% of the global energy draw right now, and we need to go bigger, everything's being electrified. Everything's being digitized.
Right.
All of that requires power. So we have to think about this in a bigger picture. And this is what we're trying to influence.
So you have that across all the issues you've identified, right? People as well, right?
Yep.
So we're not in this alone.
And what's cool about this concept that came out of all these conversations and these meetings we had is that if you go in and do a master planned town or city size thing, first off, you're going to have designed around power. Now you can make decisions around the clean energy and how to do it. Is this nuclear? Is this like hydrogen?
Whereas historically you were limited because the organic growth put constraints on what you could do. Like, I don't know if land for solar, or I'm not in a region for wind.
Exactly, because most of the infrastructure is built around populated cities. It's built around infrastructure where people are.
Right.
And the thing is, we don't need all of that. We're still going to have the inference and a lot of stuff at the edge of the metro. And that's going to keep growing, of course, as I was saying.
Sure.
But when you take these massive builds that are happening,
right,
we need to go where the power is.
The potential gigawatt campus doesn't need to be next to downtown.
10 gigawatt campus.
Oh my gosh.
And
10.
by the way, gigawatt campuses already exist. And so, but they're all one single tenant,
right,
and they're all usually purpose built for them. And so now imagine if you could take that and say, well, I could create 10 of those around this big concentrated energy source. But at the same time, I now could create this industrial thing that does both economic gains for all of it. The ecological gains is there's a company called Ecosystem Intelligence.
Okay.
And Christian Bellotti is actually championing this. It's such a cool thing. And remember, economics, ecology, and social.
Right.
This is the ecology component, but it's now going in and using satellite imagery, right? And a bunch of this 20 years of experience to say, what is the original biome of that area? Flying over and looking at it, the satellite, it would be able to say, this is what this. It was a temperate climate with something in this type of population, with vegetation, et cetera.
Right.
And then you had humans come in.
Sure.
Then it changed the biome. What could you do to get that closer back to the original biome?
I don't know. What levers do we have?
So soil, water, air is the result of this. But now you can say, well, what vegetation actually was originally there? Because one of the big problems is people say, I'll plant trees, I'll do this. They plant the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It actually unbalances the area. And they saw this, Microsoft saw this in Amsterdam. They built this big data center and they thought they were doing great. It was efficient. It was sustainable.
Right.
But it was affecting the tulips and growth. So what did they do? They went back and actually took this technology, applied to the crosser and said, here's the 7 things we could do. And they were able to now get the balance back for the air, the soil, the water. Right? It just, even think about the insects in the ground.
Sure.
Whatever you do has an impact across that. But this is, again, what I love about it is there's a way to go back and create a spider graph of the 7 things that matter in ecology to get the balance of an ecosystem itself. And so where are you? But you also have to overlay that in, the location that it's at.
Yeah. What should it be?
Right.
Because not all locations have the same spider graph.
Arizona is different than Singapore.
Sure.
And so how do you do that the right way? So there's a way to go in. And what they found was the perception from the community was these data centers are killing the tulips, hurting our community.
Right.
They went back and adjusted all this based on, they showed the results of it. And they said, we love these data centers. Can you help us do more? Because the more you build, the more this ecosystem's balanced.
Well, and then they become the stewards for that ecosystem. Become
flips perception. Yeah.
Interesting.
So at the same time, now if we do these master plan things, so we can just imagine the ability to go around clean energy. And that clean energy could be used to create green hydrogen. It could be used to create other sources. Now you're feeding the entire system. But the energy generated, the base load, is the people around that baseload.
Right.
And the utilities, one of the biggest challenges they have is where they generate power and how they get it somewhere.
Yeah.
And those transmission lines. So these clean energy zones now allow us to be able to say, let's do super investment in these things to master plan to enable this future. At the same time, you can invest in technologies that, like there's another company called Blue Planet Systems. Have you heard of them before?
Yeah, I've heard of Blue Planet.
It's such a cool thing because they basically take natural gas and they take the carbon, capture that carbon, sequester it in aggregate. The aggregate is used to create concrete, and you have carbon negative concrete. You're taking what would have been emitted and literally sequestering it in concrete. But they need economies of scale. Right. It's like a $250 million development to make this large, right? But they also need to pour a lot of concrete.
Right.
So they take the ability to take this carbon sequestration, and then you build the data centers and the plants and the homes and the roads.
I have to assume if you make these master plans, then you can build it in one place. Now we're not transporting concrete and other benefits that we come across.
Yes, it's just economies of scale and concentration of these things. So that application, now you look at that clean energy zone with ecology, economics, and social. So what community would be built in these master areas? How would the data centers be built? Do they have to be above ground? Are we bulldozing trees? These things might be able to be built with the entire forest on top of these.
Right.
We got to rethink how that's done because now we can see with a lens of ecology for that biome in that area. The engineer in me is like, yeah, this is cool.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm firing all cylinders. I'm hearing a lot of this for the first time. So, I mean, my brain's on fire a bit of all the possibilities, but it's things like this report that I think we take our assumptions of how we've built things over the last 10, 20 or more years. Yeah. And that's just how we build data centers. And this is just how we do it. But it sounds like the things you're uncovering here could really inform what we do over the next things like Cato, things like these partnerships that really change things.
Yeah, I think what's neat is we're getting the insights from the community, the challenges, but also the ability for us to think bigger together.
Yeah.
On things like the clean energy zones. And then that goes back to influence when it comes to, regulation or economic development or policy that is put back out.
Right.
If we actually were with one of the representatives from the White House in the U.S. About these clean energy zones, getting input as well, and also influencing on that side. This is an economic boom.
Oh yeah,
absolute boom. But if we can do it the right way, we can be super efficient at it.
Yeah.
If we're trying to do more manufacturing in the U.S. or again localized manufacturing, manufacturing should be around these clean energy zones. It should be a participant.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly benefit from it.
Yeah.
But it ties it all together back to our approach here in Europe is that, with regulation, with things like this, and the other thing I love about your report is not just this is one company who did their study and they understand it. And hey, maybe it was super trustworthy, or maybe it has influence based on their bias and their needs. Is that you do have a voice of so many different people in the community and you collected it in so many different ways. Like you mentioned, the individual one-on-one conversations, your workshops are different depending on the region and the topic.
Right, exactly.
So it really, I think, is a diverse feed of data. So I read through it. I love it. I implore everybody else to dig into it too.
Yeah, there's more content in the report than we've talked about here.
Absolutely.
Kind of the big punchlines that you see are the 4 Ps and then the clean energy zones. But how do we work together is the number one thing, because we compound the effect when we get communities together.
Yep.
And what I love about this is we're now bringing multiple communities between Open Compute and iMasons to compound it even further.
I think that's the theme of our discussion that we didn't have pre-planned, but we've come to the conclusion here that's really what we need to do.
Yep. And it's all around the strategy to say, how do we decarbonize digital infrastructure while we grow it 3 times?
It's a massive opportunity though.
Yep.
It's a problem, but it's a massive opportunity. If you want to have impact, you look at your career, you spent how long, in this industry doing things, you could make a not only just a much better impact, but at a magnitude far higher.
That's what I mean. Like
over the next.
So what about the last 30 years? Oh my God.
In the next 5, you could overcome that.
Yeah.
By a lot.
And what I love too is that you take the leadership at Open Compute, you take iMasons, you take the members. They're very passionate people. We build the underlying infrastructure for the Internet of Everything.
Yeah.
The world doesn't operate without what we do, and we care very much about that. And I think that we're also vulnerable enough and open enough to say we don't know everything, especially when it goes down to local ecosystems. So the ecology, the social components, we can walk in and actually embrace the communities, learn from the communities, and adapt locally to what it is that they care about. I can't emphasize that enough. If we do not figure out how to be a good neighbor with all the stuff that we're building, we can't grow.
No, certainly not. And one thing I think I can share from participating in iMasons meetings from one of the very, very early ones in Northern Virginia, maybe one of the very first, is that you're right. Both communities that I've had the privilege of being a participant in are incredibly passionate, and so many of them are lifelong learners. And curious, that's why they're participating. That's why they're here in the first place.
They're providing their valuable time because they actually care about it. And the majority of people that stick are the ones that love collaboration.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is the theme of open compute. And you look at us as well, as we bring people together. We leave our companies at the door. Why? Because you basically can use all of your experience and expertise, but you're debating and working with people to come up with a combined outcome that's going to have more impact.
Yeah, but even the debate, it's all about problem solving.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun too. So if you're listening and you don't participate in either, join one of us, reach out to one of us and
join both of us.
Yeah, join both of us. Absolutely.
Everything is beneficial.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Dean, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation. It's been very interesting. I enjoyed it personally. I hope the viewers and listeners do as well. Any final words? I mean, you really closed it up nicely for us, but anything you'd like to add?
I think we have a responsibility for building digital infrastructure the right way, and we have the right organizations with the right motivated people to actually do that with a strategy that is clear and understandable. We're going to go decarbonize digital infrastructure through equipment, materials, and power. And we're going to do this in massively optimized locations to enable 3x growth.
I love the vision. I love the clarity. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Excellent. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you.